Hey guys, Mike here from Old Man Things, and this is another episode of From the Churchillian Study. Let me light my pipe, and we shall begin. I've got a K. Woody straight billiard, and it's rusticated. As you could see from just before this, I'm doing the 4-part biography of Marlborough. But I only grabbed the first book because I wasn't going to carry 4 bloody books out here. This is the same book collection as the one I showed you before, the Young Winston, or My Early Life. And it's the 100th anniversary of the birth of Winston Churchill. So this was published in 1974. And these are the first edition, printed in the first edition series. It's not the first edition, but it's printed in that first edition. This collection is leather bound, gold gilded. It's a very nice collection in my opinion. They said they each have a portrait, actual photograph of a Winston in here, and I have not read these books, these 4 books in this biography, but I know a little about it, and I shall share the little bit I know of it. So the Duke of Marlborough. First I'll tell you about the book. So this book was first published, because there's 4 parts. The first part was published in 1933, and the last part was published in 1938. It was 4 volumes. In the International Churchill Society webpage, they have this written: as you read this great biography, you will realize how much of Churchill's World War II thought and rhetoric came from, where much of the Churchill's thoughts came from. The same themes are there: unity through alliance, death to continental tyrants. So Marlborough was actually, his name was, he was born John Churchill. And this was, so Winston Churchill was the grandson of the 7th Duke of Marlborough. The first Duke was John Churchill. And interesting enough, John Churchill's father was Sir Winston Churchill. Not the one that we know, and that's actually who Winston Churchill was named after. So John Churchill was in the British Army, and he was a high-up general, and he was in a lot of famous battles at the time, but the most famous one was the Battle of Blenheim. And that was fought in 1704. And it was during the War of Spanish Succession. And John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, led an allied force. So he was like the equivalent of Eisenhower in World War II. So he was the head of this allied force, which was England, the Dutch Republic, and Austria, against the French and Bavarian armies. And the French and Bavarian armies had their eyes set to come into England and occupy England. And well, in the Battle of Blenheim, that ended that threat. And because of that, John Churchill was made the Duke of Marlborough by the King of England at the time. And he gave him a large portion of land and gave him some money and said, build a house, build an estate. And John Churchill named the palace Blenheim Palace after the Battle of Blenheim. And he ended up having to use some of his own money, but it ended up being such a magnificent palace in England, even to this date. And Churchill was actually born, or Winston Churchill was born in Blenheim Palace. And at one time, after Winston Churchill's dad's death, Winston Churchill was first in line to becoming the next Duke of Marlborough. But then his uncle had a son. But had that happened, it would have been a completely different story, wouldn't it? So, as I said, I don't know much about this biography, and I know Winston wrote 2 biographies, this one and an earlier works of 2 volumes of his father, Lord Randolph Churchill, and I have that set too, and I'll do that in a later episode. But one of my favorite Winston Churchill movies, the first one was Darkest Hour with Gary Oldman. And up until that movie, my most favorite movie was The Gathering Storm with Albert Finney, because to me Albert Finney did such a good job portraying Winston Churchill. You felt like you were watching Winston Churchill. But in that movie, it begins where he's writing the biography, the Marlborough biography. So, sorry, I have a bit of tobacco in my mouth. So, the very beginning opening scene, Winston has a dream that he goes back to the battlefield and he sees Marlborough. And this is actually in his book that he says this happened. So I'm going to air that. At the end of this, I will air that. But I did want to say, since I'm talking about Winston Churchill movies, there's a movie called, let me make sure, it's just called Churchill. And it's supposed to be leading up to D-Day. And it's the most ridiculous movie you ever watched in your life. None of it is based on any truth at all. So if you ever watch that movie and you think this was the truth, this was real, there's nothing about it that has any truth at all. They made Churchill into a whiny little baby that was praying that D-Day didn't happen. And no one could stand him. There's even a scene where his wife slaps him in the face. That never happened. None of that ever happened. It's just a fictional anti-Winston Churchill movie. So if you've ever watched it and you didn't know, you were wondering, was this true? And none of it's true. And if you haven't watched it, in my humble opinion, don't waste your time. So, guys, this will be on my reading list, these 4-part biography. And I think this is a great collection of books. This 100th anniversary series. So with that, guys, thanks for watching. And in the words of Winston Churchill, the order of the day, keep buggering on, KBO. Till next time, thanks for watching.